All right, we are live once again on the Hoplite channel. Welcome back, everyone. Glad to see you as always. Hope you've had a couple restful weeks, such as I have. But we're recharged, and we are back for The Great Narrative, Part 2. Yep, this will be our second part for our three-part series for The Great Narrative by Klaus Schwab and his sidekick, Thierry Mallory. For everybody who watched part one, I appreciate that. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you're getting something out of the entire series I'm doing for the Klaus Schwab World Economic Forum books, the Great Reset books, as I call them. It's kind of like the Clint Eastwood series and the Man with No Name series. This is the Great Reset series, and of course it's a trilogy. So not nearly as good as the Clint Eastwood movies, but yeah. So we're discussing these books because things are going on in the world, and I believe, and maybe you're inclined to agree, that the World Economic Forum is possibly driving many of them, if not a majority. And the think tank that is the World Economic Forum has significant political, economic, and social influence across the globe, whether we like it or not. And it's mainly due to world leaders being party to the World Economic Forum. But of course, there are members of the World Economic Forum who represent no particular nation. However, they have a permanent presence there. Chief among them, of course, is Mr. Klaus Martin Schwab. And we're going to discuss this final book, The Great Narrative, for this part yet again. I'll try to go through this section rather quickly because we got some readings to jump into that are more important, but this will be a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. So in the first part, we kind of got ourselves introduced to the book itself, but now we're getting into the section where he's fleshing out the solutions to global problems as he sees it. So yeah, what are these solutions and what problems do they address? Well, he's talking geopolitical solutions to a main problem on the horizon, and that will be the United States versus China. And he talks about the Thucydides trap, where a world power finds itself at the height of its influence, the height of its treasure, its geopolitical stance is descending now that it has crested. And it feels that it's losing its grip on its spheres of influence around the world. Despite the money and despite the military it might have, it pushes harder and harder and harder to get its way. And naturally what occurs? The individual countries or nations or fledgling empires want to break free. The tighter the vice is closed around them. That's the Thucydides trap, is that it's the same concept as when you hold a handful of sand. Cupping it gently is how you probably maintain the majority of the sand in your hand versus losing it. But the quickest way to lose this hand that you hold, or this sand that you hold in your hand, is to try to tighten your grip around it. Because as you squeeze, the individual grains will slip out the sides and in between your fingers, and you will lose what you were holding. And this is what Klaus feels is going on with the United States and the up-and-coming power China. And de-dollarization is the big takeaway from this conflict that's coming with the United States and China, is that China is leading the charge along with Russia, India, South Africa, Brazil, and other countries in the BRICS nation, the BRICS coalition, to de-dollarize, and that is to move away from the US dollar as the world reserve currency, because they see that, rightly so, as the number one piece of leverage the US has over the world, is that so much of the world has to trade in the US's fiat currency, the US dollar, and they're just not having it anymore. I did a video a while back, almost a year now, about a multipolar world order incoming. If you haven't seen it, I'll link it somewhere, but it's not too far back in the catalog. But I talk about this topic, a multipolar world order that's incoming, between the U.S., China, and the BRICS nations, and the NATO Western powers. Even the Western powers are hedging their bets. France had a unilateral meeting with China not too long ago, and it angered the hell out of the U.S. and maybe some of the other NATO partners. But France is just doing what's sensible, is that they see this same geopolitical struggle between the U.S. and China as the next big thing on the horizon, and they want to stay in the good graces of the United States, but not completely isolate themselves from China, should China come out victorious over the U.S. in this geopolitical battle. Well, it's France. Okay, so we can't really expect them to hold the line, as it were. Nothing against my French followers, but yeah, it just so happens that France, among the NATO and the U.S. and the Western powers, was the first to quote unquote fold and to seek counsel and good relations with China. But that's what's happening, and I think more countries will follow suit with that as time goes by. But he also talks about technology as a solution to the growing problems in the world, and he mentions synthetic biology, and in particular mRNA vaccines, which, as we know, was the new and not quite sufficiently tested vaccine technology rolled out between 2021 and 2022, and even today. So yeah, I do the little Pac-Man ghost down there. I'm not going to say anything more, but yeah, synthetic biology is what he calls it, which is a little bit concerning because it almost sounds transhumanist, but that's what he terms it, and we'll talk about that in a particular segment of the book. And then he references the metaverse in technology as the section of technology as well, because the metaverse will become a new frontier of technology, especially as far as the internet is concerned. And I just saw a movie actually a couple days ago. I rented it on, I want to say it was on Amazon or something, but it was Ready Player One. And I don't know why I had put off seeing this movie for so long, because it was just basically a nostalgia overload for me. Like I grew up with all those like pop culture references, the video games, the cars, the movies, all that stuff. But it is kind of a glimpse into a possible future where the metaverse becomes more important to people's everyday lives than their actual physical lives, their real lives. They go to work, they clock in, they punch out, they come home, they scarf down some food, and then they spend the rest of their free time in the metaverse, with their avatars, being an ogre or being like, a race car driver or some, six-armed alien. They can be whatever they want to be. They can go wherever they want to go and almost do whatever they want to do. And it's almost like a hedonistic escapism to the nth degree. And the metaverse is most likely where that will be built. In the movie, it's called the Oasis, which I thought was kind of interesting. The writer of the book, Ready Player One, called the metaverse in that fictional world the Oasis, which obviously, in real terms, the Oasis is something you see in the desert that is a source of water, and it saves your life. It's like something that rejuvenates and brings life back to a place where there was no life. It's a life-saving destination. And it's interesting that in the movie, in the book, that's what the name of the metaverse was. It's kind of depressing to think of it that way. But it's a decent movie, so I suggest it if you're interested in what the possible utility of a metaverse will be in the future. And it will most likely be to distract the scurrying ants that are average everyday people. They live average everyday lives, so naturally they will plug in to a fake world, a digital world, and live extravagant lives. And as long as they can experience that in a simulation, well, then they'll be that much more controllable in the real world. Like, that's how we will hook them. And that's basically what the movie's about. And lastly, we discuss morality and values versus cooperation. Cooperation in quotes, because his idea of cooperation is for us to understand that it's not simply a matter of cooperating among countries or among trade alliances, but global cooperation, which is, again, I've said this many times, it's a very nice and fuzzy way of saying communism. Global cooperation is the World Economic Forum's vision for what will be technocratic global communism. And that's the name of the game. That's all these three books boil down to. It is getting people to agree to cooperate to the World Economic Forum's vision for a better future. Okay, let's get to the readings. Great narrative. And we'll jump to page 79. And this is in reference to the geopolitics that will play out between the US and China. Klaus writes, most narratives about the current and future relationship between China and the US tend to be bearish. Why so? Because in the foreseeable future, the two countries are likely to evolve in a way that will make them less prone to seek ways to collaborate effectively with each other. The reasons are the following. At this juncture in history, neither the US nor China has an incentive to tone the confrontation down. The US, after decades of unrivaled global dominance, is currently engaged in the process of strategic contraction. It may continue to dominate the geopolitical landscape for many more years, but its absolute supremacy is now gone, forcing its leadership to manage an inevitable gradual decline as gently as it can. That said, as Ferguson put it, the retreat from global dominance is rarely a peaceful process, an observation that the American pullout from Afghanistan made painfully vivid. As the global hegemon renounces global policing, it incites all sorts of declared enemies and other protagonists to test its resolve and emboldens them to make trouble elsewhere. In addition, doubts have been expressed by many American and foreign observers about the way in which the U.S. system is evolving and whether its social fabric and political structures are as resilient now as they were in the past. They worry about whether the U.S. society and its system of government have been structurally impaired by polarization and cronyism. Moises Naim echoed such concerns when saying, the next midterm elections in the U.S. will be an important test of that. We'll see many illiberal initiatives and ideas put into play and gaining support. I predict that funding of the U.S. military will be more contested. The country spends about $738 billion each year in defense, which is more than the next 10 countries combined. And there was a peaceful coexistence with the notion that the Pentagon can spend limitless money with no constraints. But what did that buy the United States or the world over the last 20 years in Afghanistan or Iraq? When was the last time the United States was as victorious in a large-scale operation? Is that worth spending $738 billion a year? That debate will be very important. In the past, the lobbyists and the military-industrial financial complex took care of protecting that budget because they ate and profited from that budget. That may become more difficult in the future. High military spending will not go away, but it will be more contested and politically costly. As for China, its leadership exudes confidence about the country's political system, its position vis-a-vis the U.S., and long-term stability of the Chinese Communist Party. It seems determined to reclaim what it sees as its rightful global position at a time when it has the economic and military capabilities to be more assertive. After decades of uninterrupted rapid economic and military development, the country has now reached an inflection point. Growth is slowing and challenges are mounting in a global environment perceived by some to be more hostile to Chinese interests. It is for this reason that if the country is to become a modern socialist nation by 2035, Xi believes bold action must be taken now. But many analysts point out that there is nothing inexorable about China's rise to global dominance. Its population is aging very fast and its workforce shrinking, while over-indebtedness and the deflating of the property bubble could trigger a major and abrupt contraction in growth. If so, some experts argue that it is weakness rather than its strengths that would pose the greatest dangers to geopolitical stability. Their argument is that if the economic difficulties grow, China's leadership might choose to stoke nationalism by escalating confrontation with the U.S., with Taiwan as the most tempting target. Okay. I can't disagree with most of that. I think that's a fair and accurate assessment as to what's going on. I definitely remember the day of the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. And what an unmitigated debacle that was. They pulled up sticks from Bagram Air Force Base and decided to fly everybody out of the Kabul airport, which had basically no security. And the security it did have, the outer perimeter, was left up to the Taliban and ISIS. ISIS infiltrated the Taliban ranks, and one of those pieces of garbage blew himself up and killed 13 of our troops. And then you had other insane footage of Afghans literally hanging off the wheels of C-17s as they flew away. There was one crazy video. Some guy hung onto the wheel for like, I want to say 10 seconds while the plane was airborne and probably fell to his death after he got pulled off the side by the wind shear. Most likely he fell like 600, 700 feet. It was crazy. And it really did show that the United States is an empire in complete decline and retreat. And that photo should be the quintessential photo of the Biden administration, is when he had to come back to the White House and was getting questions from every single reporter who actually did their job that day. And all he could do was hold his binder and just like look down at the ground, like, how do I get out of this? Like, why am I here right now? That was his look on his face. Is like, what do we do? But of course it blew over, and the next tragedy or the next crisis or fiasco took the news, and it was forgotten. But the Chinese didn't forget that. They saw that, and the Russians saw that, and they said, the United States is on its heels. And do you think for 1 second Russia saw that and didn't put that into their calculations? Should we or should we not invade Ukraine the following February? And they did. And we see how that's going. Russia is grinding down the Ukraine military to the point where there won't be any men of military age left in that country if it continues to go on. And I saw another crazier story today. The UK, in a complete show of indifference to the Ukrainian people and idiocy, said they were going to send depleted uranium munitions to the Ukraine army to use against Russian tanks. Now, for those of you who don't know, depleted uranium is a high-density element that can be incorporated into armor-piercing rounds for tank slugs. In other words, it is a high-tech round that's been around for decades now, but the U.S. used it extensively in Iraq, and it was used to defeat armor. The problem is when depleted uranium hits its intended target, the material will penetrate, but will also create so much friction and heat that a good portion of it is aerosolized. So you have depleted uranium in basically microscopic form, and it will get into the soil and it will get into the groundwater, and it's still technically radioactive. So what do you think happens after thousands of those rounds are shot and the earth absorbs all of that radioactive material? Well, it gets in the water, it gets in the food, and the people who live in that god-awful place where that happened will have incidents of increased cancer, birth defects, and all sorts of terrible illnesses that go along with radiation sickness and radiation poisoning. And the UK just said, yeah, we're going to send that stuff to the Ukraine. And the Ukraine military is going to use it against Russia. As in, even if you win this fight, Russia, we're going to see to it that Ukraine is a wasteland and can't be populated again. So you people can't settle there even if you win. It's essentially what the Romans did when they had a victory or even a defeat. If they were in retreat, they would just salt the earth. Why would they salt the earth? So nothing would grow there. Meaning, even if we lose this land, even if we are conquered, you will not be able to live here because the earth will not bear fruit. The earth will not give life. And the Russians told the UK, if you do this, we will respond in kind. And they did. And I want to say yesterday, evening, they hit a munitions storage facility in western Ukraine and blew it to Kingdom Come. And there was a significant spike in gamma radiation. Okay? There was a significant spike in gamma radiation where that blast occurred. Did the Russians use a tactical nuke, or did they use a tactical nuke and the UK's depleted uranium munitions were blown up? Meaning Russia told the UK, if you send that stuff to Ukraine, we will destroy it. But we're going to destroy it in western Ukraine before it gets to eastern or northern Ukraine along our border. The second part about that is this part, and I don't want to mispronounce the name, but I'll put it up. This part of Ukraine is where a large store of winter wheat is kept and grown by the country of Ukraine for export to Europe. And they use it to make bread and flour and I'm sure pasta, all those other storable foods that can be made from wheat come from this winter wheat grown in this area. So now, by accepting these munitions from Ukraine, they may have just irradiated possibly their largest crop for export being wheat. And this is what's going on. And the midterm elections that are referenced in here, the U.S. spends $738 billion each year. Well, this was written just before the Ukraine war, and it didn't stop our government from sending $55 billion to a foreign country for their military-industrial complex to wage a war on our behalf. So I disagree with this. Like, if the U.S. doesn't want an actual conflict with China or Russia, we'll just start wars in other countries and let those people fight and die with our weapons. So the military-industrial complex, if they can't get Jim Bob from the Ozarks to sign up for the military and wear their gear and shoot their guns, they'll give their equipment to Ivan and his brother Boris, and they'll tell him to use it against some Russian kid who they're going to send to pacify Ukraine. So that I don't see that slowing down. I could be wrong, but China definitely is going to use this opportunity to make a move on Taiwan. I think that's going to come in the next year or two. If China doesn't make a move on Taiwan by 2025, I'll be very surprised, because this war in Ukraine cannot go on forever. And like I said, with the way things are going, they're going to run out of men before Russia runs out of bombs and bullets. And I hate to say that, but that's just a fact of the matter. And they're just going slowly but surely from east to the west of Ukraine, and they're in no rush, because they know that the United States and the Western nations are going to run out of money. They're going to run out of their own munitions to send. And if they do send something of significance, the Russians are just going to blow it up, as they did in Western Ukraine last night. Okay, moving on. We jump to page 94. This is in reference to the metaverse. Under technology, Klaus wrote, the word metaverse, now embraced by big tech companies like Facebook and Microsoft, was coined in a novel written by Neil Stephenson, Snow Crashed, in 1992. The book's tone was rather dystopian. The novel takes place in an anarcho-capitalist universe ravaged by hyperinflation, and depicts a virtual space shared by both humans and digital daemons. 30 years later, the term metaverse has become shorthand for a series of interconnected virtual worlds whose sophistication should rapidly grow. The metaverse will contain environments where we will earn money, forge relationships, and have all sorts of different experiences that could enrich our lives, or quite the opposite. Opinions diverge, but all those who think about the metaverse agree that it will have a profound impact on how our societies function, our economies run, and our political systems operate. The distinction between being offline and online will become increasingly blurred and hard to identify, and the meaning of reality itself will evolve. It might become extended, XR, combining augmented, virtual, and mixed realities. There is no doubt that this whole process will be a transformative one. Some loathe the idea, others embrace it with enthusiasm. Okay, so I mentioned in the intro here the technology aspect of it. The metaverse is a big part of, I think, the World Economic Forum's plan to manage humanity like livestock. And that's kind of how they see you. Spoiler, I wouldn't give away that, but They see you as livestock to be managed. And this metaverse, this interconnected series of worlds that's possibly dystopian, but maybe not, will potentially blur the lines between digital and actual reality. Meaning you may become so immersed in this metaverse experience that you don't even know if this is real or this is digital. You don't even know if you're in the metaverse or if you're back in the real world. And that's kind of what that movie, like Ready Player One, was about. People end up living their lives more on the digital world platform, the Oasis, than they do back in the real world, because they all live in these, stacked up motorhomes, which they call the stacks. And why would you want to go back to that when you could just throw on a headset and a full sensation bodysuit and ski the Alps, or I don't know, play blackjack in a Las Vegas casino, or maybe you want to do some other extracurricular activities that you'd rather not talk about in a public setting. But the metaverse is where all that is a potential alternative reality. And they would rather you live in that alternative reality, spend your real cash there, and then when you come back to the real world and have to make it in the real world, you just trudge into the salt mines, do actual real physical labor, only to give it back to the metaverse because you want to upgrade your armor or buy that all-inclusive digital vacation, on the moon or something. That'll be coming too. And the metaverse is what they see as, and this is my term, it is the digital or virtual pasture that they will put the human livestock out to graze. And when you're doing that, you're just consuming, right? You're consuming this information. You're consuming all this stimulation. What aren't you doing? You're not living real life as nature intended or God intended, right? You're not starting a family. You're not buying a home. You're not forging relationships with your neighbors or your neighbors' friends or whoever. You're in this digital virtual pasture and you just graze. And that's your life. And I think that's what the metaverse is going to be for. It's going to be separating the herd from people who manage the herd. Okay, moving on. Page 100. This is under AI and warfare. This should be good. Klaus wrote, in May of 2021, the UN reported that for the first time ever, military-grade autonomous drones that can fly themselves to a specific location, pick their own targets, and kill without the assistance of a remote human operator had been deployed on the battlefield in Libya at March 2020. Such drones can be operated both autonomously and manually, and use machine learning and real-time image processing against their targets. At the end of September 2020, the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh displayed the first evidence of an intense modern warfare being partially cyber. Autonomous killer drones capable of deadly force were used on the Azeri side and secured victory against the Armenians. There is no doubt that such weapons, which already exist alongside biomimetic weapons, will become increasingly prevalent in modern conflicts, posing numerous ethical concerns and dilemmas in terms of international humanitarian law that governs armed conflict and for which there are currently no response. Stuart Russell, a British pioneering AI researcher who spent the past 10 years trying to ban AI from being used to locate and kill human targets, warns that AI weapons are developing fast and in a completely unregulated manner. You can buy them today. They are advertised on the web. A lethal AI-powered quadcopter could be as small as a tin of shoe polish. About 3 grams of explosives are enough to kill a person at close range. A regular container could hold 1 million lethal weapons, and they could all be sent to do their work at once. So the inevitable endpoint is that autonomous weapons could become cheap, selective weapons of mass destruction. Therefore, in his informed opinion, like that of many other prominent scientists and ethicists in the field of AI, the proliferation of AI weapons poses an imminent and existential threat. To counter it, Max Tegmark, a MIT professor and co-founder of the Future of Life Institute, a think tank that works on reducing global catastrophic and existential risk from powerful technologies, has suggested implementing an international moratorium on autonomous lethal weapons. Scientists in other countries are pursuing a similar route. like the 400 German AI researchers who published an open letter to the German government asking that its armed forces stop developing such systems and recommending that such dehumanization of life and death decision-making by autonomous weapon systems must be outlawed worldwide. Okay, so we're talking about Terminators, right? If you're familiar with the Terminator franchise, in the first movie, Reese refers to hunter-killers, right? They are basically big, in the movie, they're big helicopter, like hover droids that scan the, LA wasteland looking for human survivors. And they either engage them directly or pinpoint their location, and bipedal humanoid T-800 Terminators go and hunt them down. He's saying that's already being done right now. In March of 2020 in Libya, we've already had a drone that was either partially controlled manually or fully autonomous pick a human target and kill him. So yeah, the genie's out of the bottle, wouldn't you say? It's not like, well, these German scientists, they wrote a letter to the German government saying, hey, we should outlaw this worldwide. How do you do that? It's like saying, we've developed a nuclear weapon, the technology is out there, other countries can buy it or learn it, how do we ban this? Well, I guess it's a gentleman's agreement, right? Well, what's keeping someone honest, right? It's like, well, we're gonna ban autonomous drones because that's the right thing to do. It's like, we're really not gonna ban them, we're gonna build them. But we absolutely understand how a dangerous and possibly apocalyptic technology this could be. It's like, yeah, we're going to be the winners of that war. Like, no one's going to agree to outlaw these things if they exist, because they're going to say, well, what's keeping my opponent honest? Like, do you think Pakistan and India are going to shake hands that no one's going to use autonomous, like, hunter-killer drones, but they can use all the other weapons? Or China and Taiwan, or Ukraine and Russia? I mean, it's all well and good to say that, this Max Tegmark, who's like the co-founder of the Future of Life Institute, it sounds like the Human Fund, he's saying that, well, we need to reduce these technologies from being implemented, and there should be an international moratorium. It's like, yeah, well, there should be, right? There should also be world peace, and people, should give more to charity, but they don't. This idea that AI weapons are going to be slowed down by some international agreement will require the use of force from a collective group of nations who have to essentially oversee it. The same thing with nuclear non-proliferation, right? There was an agreement, a tentative agreement to not produce any weapons beyond a certain point, but people were holding their stockpiles that they had already made. And if they aged out, well, maybe they were replaced or maybe they weren't. But again, like, warfare is a winner-take-all game. There is no second prize for being a good sport and for, I guess, playing by a more honorable set of rules. You're either winning or you're losing. And if AI technology enables one country to, as this guy said, program a drone the size of a tin of shoe polish and takes out high value targets with incredible accuracy, and it literally costs them that drone and 3 grams of explosive, you better believe they're going to develop that. And that will become more and more obvious as time goes by and new conflicts arise. You will see more use of AI, more use of drones, etc. And I don't know how you, like I said, put that genie back in the bottle. Anyway, let's move on to the next section, page 102. This is under synthetic biology, as I mentioned earlier. Klaus writes, "We are at the dawn of the genetics revolution. Having sequenced the human genome, turned adult cells into stem cells, understood how to rewrite the genetic code of any living cell, and reduce the cost of hacking genes by a factor of millions. Besides, we already have a successful example proving that synthetic biology delivers on its promise. Just as World War II accelerated electronics, the pandemic has propelled the genetics revolution towards new frontiers. When COVID-19 struck, it triggered an immediate and furious search for a vaccine. Those that came first are mRNA vaccines that insert synthetic strings of genetic code that are computer modeled into our bodies. Instead of triggering our immune system with the traditional vaccine that injects a weakened, dead, or partial pathogen, mRNA vaccines instruct our cells to produce spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus. By doing so, they transform our bodies into personalized manufacturing plants, producing an otherwise foreign object to trigger our natural immune response. This approach will soon create a whole new platform for fighting cancers and other diseases, as well as for providing enhancements ever more profound than vaccination. The potential of such Promethean technologies seems amazing and infinite, transforming our healthcare so that personalized treatments and predictive health issue modeling becomes possible, brewing animal proteins from cell cultures and generating energy from algae to save the planet. These are many other applications which seem in reach. But so too does the possibility to use them for the wrong purpose, inadvertently, implicitly, or with intent. The potential of synthetic biology is such that it's not hard to imagine what could go wrong. What if, in the case of a pandemic, we only inoculate citizens in the rich countries? Not a far-fetched scenario. What if we improve or prolong the life of only those who can afford it? What if we start discriminating against people based on their genetic information? What if soon anyone can make a virus from scratch? What if genetic manipulation or pre-implanted embryos leads to eugenics? What if a country or a malicious group decides to produce a dangerous, unknown synthetic pathogen? What if the next pandemic is lab-made? What if a pathogen is enhanced to increase transmissibility or its ability to cause disease is augmented? These are a few common sense questions for which we don't yet have an answer. Oh, I don't know about that, Klaus. So yeah, what if the next pandemic is lab-made? I mean, this one obviously wasn't, because that's silly. Who in the right mind would say that? But yeah, what if bad actors create a virus from scratch? And what if the genetics are manipulated for pre-implanted embryos, and that leads to eugenics? What if a country decides to produce a more dangerous synthetic pathogen? Yeah, what if all this stuff, right? He's asking these questions as though like we don't know what's going on. Like all of these things are going on, right? What if this? What if that? It's like, what do you mean, what if? Like the question should be how many are being produced, right? How many different countries are doing this? And this idea that we're going to basically inject you with an mRNA vaccine to instruct your body on how to build a spike protein. Yeah, that didn't go so well. That's still not going so well. Because as it turns out, our bodies don't like being told what to do. Your body is the product of thousands upon thousands of years of evolution. Okay? So when we inject something into our body and the body doesn't know what it is, the body's instinct, based upon years and years of evolution, is to say, oh, I've got an invader, so I need to address it. Okay? When it addresses an invader, it's trying to eliminate it somehow. But when you try to eliminate something that is trying to hijack your body's immune system or whatever, things can go sideways, like blood clots, for example, or myocarditis. But I'm not a doctor, so I'm just saying this as a concerned citizen, that maybe this kind of mRNA synthetic biology is way too new a technology to be trying out willy-nilly on the population because, well, it's a new big thing. But we've already done it, right? We've already inoculated or vaccinated half the global population with this synthetic biology, the first generation of it. So I hope it all works out in the end for everybody. But he's saying that, well, we can build basically anything to fight anything, to fight cancer and other diseases. We can build this synthetic biology to create superhumans. We're going to rewire your defense system, your immune system, to build something that it's never encountered before, versus introducing something that has been essentially neutered or made immobile, so your defense immune system that you're born with naturally can take its own schematic map of what the invading pathogen is and build its own defense, which is much more safe and much more natural, right? Instead of telling them, here's what you will build, you instruct them, your immune system, here's the enemy, build something to defeat this. And your immune system, as I said, is the product of thousands of years of evolution. It can figure it out if it's given a chance, if it has enough time to develop antibodies. But we didn't want to wait for that, right? There was a rush. There was a rush to develop this new technology to fight this problem that was the pandemic. So we just created it. We injected it into hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, and everything's going to be fine. And we know that's not true. So this potential of synthetic biology, we're going to see how it plays out in the years to come. And yeah, I imagine improvements will be made, but it's going to be a rocky road for everybody in the meantime who volunteered without that data available. Okay, next passage. We jump to page 116. Klaus writes, along the same lines, but in an expanded fashion, Raghuram Rajan suggests promoting the notion of inclusive localism, which consists in strengthening and empowering communities. An effective framework of global cooperation won't function without the buy-in of those who currently do not feel included in the process, meaning that global governance must coexist with local power in a way that makes it inclusive. Rajan explains in quite some detail. To simplify, we have three pillars: the government's or political side, the economics, and the third or forgotten pillar, the community or social side. When the three are in balance, we get harmonious progress and well-being. When one or the other gets too strong, it creates imbalance and reactions result, sometimes from the other pillars, or society becomes dysfunctional. If we're to get back in balance, we must focus on strengthening and empowering communities, on more decentralization and on more economic power, because many of the disadvantaged communities don't have the ability to work for their people and put them back on track. To the extent the people can determine things locally, they should, because that's what democracy is all about. The globalization of markets means globalization of governance, and much less power locally. That creates populist backlash, but the kind of local determination that the local population wants often excludes a lot. They'll exclude global markets and become exclusionists. Or they'll exclude immigrants, and it will be America for native-born Americans. What I have in mind is that what I call inclusive localism. More local power, but used in a way that's inclusive. Borders encircle your local community, but they're porous borders. They ensure we have a sense of belonging, that we're not uniform with people outside, yet they're not so high that anybody is kept out. Anybody who wants to join can come in. That kind of inclusive localism is seen increasingly in big cities and in some countries like Canada, where they're attempting to forge a sense of commonality among the people. In the long run, it would be more empowerment locally, but also a community that's broadly accepting of differences. That's how we'll be able to deal with some of these broader forces like globalization. The word inclusivity is key. The will to cooperate that underpins effective global governance won't happen without the greater involvement of civil society and local actors. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said as much in our common agenda. He sounded the alarm about the urgency of the task. Humanity faces a stark and urgent choice: breakdown or breakthrough. The choices we make or fail to make today could result in a further breakdown and a future of perpetual crises, or a breakthrough to a better, more sustainable, peaceful future for our people and the planet. As expressed in various narratives related by our interviewees, the fact that we are confronting problems that are unique in scale and that we're all in this together may trigger a strong movement for global cooperation. We're social animals after all, and our innate proclivity to cooperate has the power to save us. All right, so this is the section on cooperation, right? It's all about cooperation, and it's all about inclusivity. And this sounds like communist utopia hell. This idea that, you have the government, you have the economy, and you have the forgotten pillar, the community. So we need to build communities up and make them better, but you can't build borders around your community, so anyone can come in, but anyone can leave. And that's how we're going to build stability. And we're doing that in big cities and places like Canada. Yet you notice how whenever they talk about this stuff, it's only the Western nations. It's only the nations that literally had to spend the last 200 years building themselves up into a first world nation, where immigration was very restrictive because they wanted to keep commonality at the core of what the country would be. They wanted people more or less of the same race, ethnicity, religion, and language, because you cannot build a first world nation if you do not have that commonality foundation. It just will not work. throughout history, multicultural nations, or countries rather, they're not nations, multicultural countries inevitably fail. Or if they don't entirely fail, they just stagnate. Because you have too much division, you have too much difference among your population. Nobody wants to build with somebody they don't share basic commonalities in, right? They see different people, they hear different languages, they observe different customs, different religious practices. They don't feel at home in their home. But they're saying, well, we're going to fix all that because we're going to get everyone to agree to cooperate. And that's just the way it's going to be. You won't have borders, but you'll have communities somehow. And it'll get everybody back on track if they just accept that global governance will fix all of these differences that you might have in your locality. And the fact of the matter is, it won't. That's total BS. It'll actually exacerbate things. And it's going on in the United States right now. The United States, unfortunately, in my lifetime, has changed dramatically in the last 30 years. Well, definitely in the last 10 years, but 30 years, I have noticed growing from a boy to a young man to an adult man, I can feel the differences and changes happening in the United States. And yeah, it's mostly happening in major metropolitan areas and cities. And the major metropolitan areas and cities are the most racially, ethnically, linguistically, and religiously diverse. And they're hellholes. Nobody wants to live there. People want to live in their own communities with like-minded and people who are similar to them. It's just human nature. So forcing this inclusivity, global governance model on the Western nations is what they want to do to break the back of the first world. Because you cannot convince people to accept a global governance model of communism if their current situation is far better than anything that might promise them. So you need to flood their country with people who are going to come and essentially destroy it via diversity. They're going to carve out their own places in the country to a point where it will be indistinguishable from anywhere else. Like, your identity will be the lack of identity. And that is hell. To have a home where you don't feel at home. To look around you and see mostly strangers. That will break you down. That will get you to ask for a global governance because you want some sense of commonality and order, and that's how you get it. Is if you finally accept the fact that you don't have a homeland anymore, your people are broken, but it's okay, we're going to have global governance. And despite the hell in which you live, we're all going to live in the same hell. And that will be your better future. That's just how I see it. Feel free to disagree. Next section, second to last, we go to page 136. Klaus writes again. Thus, welcoming a diversity of views, opinions, and beliefs seems to be a precondition for effective cooperation, even when values do not necessarily converge, and they never entirely do. From a psychological perspective and that of neuroscience, divergence is normal. According to Patricia Churchland, humans have always had divergence. Their neural circuitry is formed very early after birth in the context of the group they belong to, and their social values become very strong given that context. Consequently, it's very easy for groups with somewhat different takes on moral issues to feel that how they do it is right and how others do it is not. Nowhere is this more apparent than at the international level, where there is no such misalignment between countries that promote various value systems, offering different models of political institutions, economic development, governance, social contracts. These value misalignments are not confined to geopolitical rivalry and have a tendency to spill over into other domains. To give one example provided by Rana Foroohar, which could impact the digital economy and the way it is governed globally. The one world, two systems paradigm is real, and it's not going away. China has made it very clear that it's going to its own way in terms of surveillance capitalism. There are no assumptions of privacy in China, and they're rolling out tech standards in the One Belt, One Road system that may work well for China and some other countries, but probably aren't aligned with liberal democratic values. In such circumstances, where is a common value system to be found? it would be illusory to think there is one such system that would be acceptable to all, and therefore it might be better to acknowledge that different value systems can coexist and avoid one country attempting to impose its own system on the rest. One interviewee, Branko Milanovic, spoke for several when recommending such a solution. I think less imposition of one's own values on other countries and systems would make the world better because there could be less likelihood of a conflict. Many conflicts come from a certain conceit, particularly strong in the West after the end of communism, that the West system is not only the best system, but the only one, and everyone strives for it. That has already led to many disastrous interventions and ultimately to possibilities of a war because it could spill over into conflict with China. One thing that's crucial for all of us is world peace. Without peace, nothing of what we talked about matters. But sometimes people forget that, especially if they themselves do not have to bear the consequences of wars, but cheer for bombers while sitting comfortably at home and taking children to school. Without debating the merits of this argument, it's worth noting that a growing number of non-Western thinkers and policymakers, including some of those interviewed for this book, express their impatience, if not anger, at the West, telling them what is best and trying to impose its values upon the rest of the world. Chandra Nair has made this point vehemently, denouncing Western arrogance, i.e. the belief that the superiority of the value system, and a white savior mentality whereby technologies and practices built in the West will save the supposedly underdeveloped, poorly governed, and polluted non-Western world. All right. Well, that was a big passage. But yeah, we're talking about a multipolar world, right? So how are you going to achieve this global governance when we're entering what will be a multipolar world, especially after the US dollar collapses as the world reserve currency? All these countries are going to go on to their own currencies, and the majority of them in the developing worlds or the developed world will be digital currencies, possibly central bank digital currencies. China is definitely going to use that. They're using it right now, the digital renminbi. And the One Belt, One Road system, that's happening too. And they will have essentially a surveillance economy where you're free to do what you want, but we're watching you. And if we don't like it, well, then you might not be able to do it any longer than that. So people hate the West, right? But they hate it for all the right reasons, but their response to it is illogical, right? It's like, well, I don't like the West telling everybody what to do. And, there's this white savior complex where just because the Western world develop all these cool technologies and, you enjoy the most freedom, they think that should be like the outcome and the model for the rest of the world. And that's just not right. Okay, well, if that's the case, why are people flooding to get into here? Why are migrants like jumping over walls, jumping over borders, swimming, across rivers to get into the Western worlds if it's so bad here and there's this white savior complex that nobody, wants to be a part of, right? It's this cognitive dissonance that, well, we don't like the Western world and these white saviors telling us what to do, but we sure like the money and we sure like the goodies and the gadgets. So yeah, give us all that stuff, but spare us how society should be run. We'll take care of that. It's like, well, you can't have it both ways, right? The reason the Western world became the white savior of the world is because it developed the first world. The modern first world is the West, and that's just the way it is, right? People come to the first world because you do have the freedom to essentially express yourself via your talents, via your work ethic, and basically just your raw desire to maximize your life on planet Earth. And it's not perfect, but it's about as good as you're going to get. So I don't see people jumping over the Great Wall of China to become a Chinese citizen from the West. I don't see people walking across 100 miles of northern Mexico to become Mexican citizens. I don't see people flying, right, from the U.S. to North Korea asking, is this where I sign up for the free pair of prison clothes and I get my shovel and I spend the rest of my life, digging for precious metals. Like nobody is breaking into those countries. People are trying to get into the Western countries. And that's the problem with this inclusivity idea, is if everything is for free and the door is wide open, then nobody cares. Nobody's going to stay and defend that country if they should one day come under attack from a world power that wants to dethrone them, right? If you're bringing in all these people and it's all about inclusivity and it's all about cooperation, well, then that's given cheaply and it will be treated cheaply. People will abandon that. And if life becomes unbearable in the United States because everything's been given away, people will just flee back to their native homelands and they'll take, whatever's not nailed down. And that is like the farce that is the idea of this book, is that we're going to get Western and non-Western or Eastern thinkers to agree to cooperate despite this multipolarity that's going to essentially become the new world order in the next 5 to 10 years. It's not going to happen. So this idea that global governance and cooperation is going to just, create world peace is a pipe dream. It just is. Okay, last reading. Here we go. We are on page 143. Klaus takes us out. Slowly but surely, morality is entering economics via interdisciplinary and insights from neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral studies. As already mentioned, the mistaken single picture of the Homo economist as an optimizing machine is incomplete at best. We now know that the fundamental concepts that underpin classical economics, like the maximization of interest, fixed preferences, and rational decision-making, are either wrong or at least much too limiting. Yes, we human beings are selfish, delusional, and short-sighted, but we're at the same time profoundly altruistic and attuned to the needs of others. We do not care only for our children, close family members, and their future, but also other people and the future of the planet as well. Hence, morality and value considerations constantly interfere with our decisions, both individual and collective. The new disciplines of narrative economics, evolutionary economics, and agent-based modeling are starting to take this into account. Their influence is growing, but they remain embryonic. Concurrently, some mainstream economists are also drawing public attention to the need to not disassociate morality from economics. Luigi Zingales from the University of Chicago was one of them. His pioneering work on crony capitalism, regulatory capture, and how the pernicious collusion between big business and big government operates helps to understand the current resistance to some of the measures destined to tackle environmental degradation or the reduction in inequalities. When firms or industries fix the rules of the game in their favor, this amounts to a form of legal corruption that subverts competition, hinders the functioning of the markets, and gives a very bad name to capitalism. Hence, only morality and primacy of values can reinstate the search for the common good at the core of the policy. Pointedly, Rebecca Henderson said, "I spend time trying to persuade my colleagues in economics that not only is burning the planet bad for business, but also it's fundamentally immoral in terms of economics itself. Under certain assumptions, when markets are fully competitive and externalities are fully priced, maximizing profits can get us to the Pareto frontier. It could be an approximation of maximizing welfare. But when markets are not fully competitive and externalities are not fully priced, I can dump greenhouse gases for free, causing massive harm to public health right now and cause harm for thousands of years to millions of people. And that's not the market that economics had in mind. That was not the fundamental foundation. So I spent a lot of time trying to use the basic tenets of economics to say that economics has always been moral. You thought that you could abstract it and just do the mathematics, but if the market is failing this badly, then you have to think about the morality. How could it be otherwise? Companies and the economy in which they operate are human and social institutions. As a consequence, in every turn, decisions made about how we work, how we are remunerated, how healthy we are, how we demands from the community are considered, and so on, entail moral considerations underpinned by specific value systems. The simple question of remuneration makes this obvious. Top American CEOs earn on average 351 times more than the typical worker. Is this merely a technical or governance issue left at the entire discretion of the company's remuneration committee, or should it also entail a moral dimension? Some professions, like investment banking, command considerable bonuses, while others, like medicine, have none. A short seller can make millions in bonuses, but a cardiac surgeon who may save your life makes none. Nor will they expect a share of your future income when a life-saving operation is successful. Is this a fact of life simply to be accepted, or does it speak to our values? In conclusion, the innumerable business and economic decisions that are taken daily cannot be exempt from moral calls and value judgments. Okay. All right, so that was another long passage, but what he's trying to say, or what he's trying to drive at, is that, listen, you can't separate morality from economics. It just can't be done, because it's not all about the mathematics involved, right? Like buy low, sell high, maximize profits, minimize overhead. Yeah, you can't do all that unless there's morality involved, because, well, you might harm the earth. And if you're going to harm, the earth for millions of people for thousands of years, that's not how, market economics needs to work. And they simply state this as a matter of fact. Like, I don't see anything in this passage that goes to back up that claim. In capitalism, raw, pure capitalism is essentially what people would consider amoral. And we had that in the United States for probably the better part of 100 years. From like 1800 to 1900, the United States had raw capitalism, where people could form cartels with their rich buddies. They could have monopolies, right? They could literally destroy their competition through any means necessary, sometimes by eliminating the competition physically, if that got them ahead in business. What happened as a consequence? A lot of people suffered. A lot of people were treated like garbage, who were good people, and a lot of evil was done. But a lot of good happened as a byproduct, right? Through this raw capitalism, you had things like the Industrial Revolution, which Klaus talks about in his first book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. The Second Industrial Revolution in the United States, which gave us, skyscrapers and electricity and the modern rail system. All of that happened because of raw capitalism. There was no real morality involved. It was only when Teddy Roosevelt and the Sherman Act and the trust busting and all that stuff happened that morality was inserted into the equation via legislation. And that's kind of how it should always be, right? You're never going to get people who are making money to agree to a list or a, Bible of economic morality, prerequisites. As in, if you're going to do this, you need to make sure you're doing this first. And if this is going to be your profit margin, well, then your workers need to be compensated at X. Like, they're never going to agree to all that, especially if they're in competition with their fellow capitalists. It's only by virtue of law, and that law being enforced, that you will have any morality in economics and in capitalism. So I disagree with all this. But what is this passage meant to be about? Well, he's trying to give you this idea that, well, is it really fair that a CEO makes 351 times the rank and file worker at his company? And why is it that a investment banker can, make dividends on stocks and he can possibly generate future income from a sale, but a heart surgeon doesn't get a share of your future income because of a life-saving surgery? And my question it would be, well, why don't they? Right? If a surgeon's going to save your life, why doesn't he say to you, I will give you this life-saving, quad bypass or whatever, but I'm going to need a written agreement that 1% of your future earning will come back to me. And maybe he does that for all of his patients, right? Would you be willing to sign that contract? Like, well, if you promise that you're going to save my life and give me, another 20 to 30 years on my ticker, then yeah, I will sign away 1% of my future earnings, whatever they may be, in exchange for this life-saving surgery. The problem with that is that I think surgeons realize that people will just shop around, and they're going to find a surgeon who's good enough at his job and say, he wants 1% of my earnings. How about I just give you a lump sum of 25 or let's say 30 grand, and you give me the best heart surgery available. And that surgeon might say, yeah, okay, fine. I don't need this 1%, of your future earnings. I'm not going to make you do that. Just come in tomorrow and we'll prep you up and we'll get you fixed up. Like, that's capitalism too, right? This guy wants 1% of your future earnings. This guy just wants a lump sum of 30 grand up front. Now, if you're a multi-millionaire and you plan on making a hell of a lot more money after your surgery, you're going to find the guy who's good enough and give him 30 grand. You're not going to want to give every surgeon 1% of your net worth for everything you go in like that might be life-saving. If it does change, I mean, it always could, but what he's trying to say is that it's not fair that people make certain amounts of money on certain things and other people don't, even though their services or the good they create might be more valuable to human life. It's just, that's just how things shake out. But that's the nature of capitalism. It's like, it's not fair. It just needs to be legal. And if you're talking about equity versus equality, that's the difference, right? Equality is a legal idea. Equity is a social idea, as in everybody should have a share of this. Everybody should have, this minimum income. He's pushing us towards a better future of equity, and that it's not fair that somebody makes 351 times what their average worker makes. And again, that is one more example as to why the World Economic Forum and the Great Narrative is moving you into a mindset to accept communism on a global scale. And I wish I could make it sound more poetic than that, but I can't, because that's all there is to it. Anyway, that'll do it for part 2 of The Great Narrative by Klaus Schwab and Thierry Mallory of the World Economic Forum. I appreciate you hanging around. If you're still here at the end, you're a trooper. Give us a thumbs up, a subscription if you haven't already. Leave a comment if you want to chat about this. As I said in other videos, I do read the comments and I will reply if anybody has a direct question for me, or if they have any suggestions. I'm all ears. It's all about equity in the comment section. So yeah, I appreciate people who leave comments, thumbs up, and the like. So with that being said, we'll see you back here next time for part 3, the conclusion to the Great Narrative for a Better Future and the conclusion for the Great Reset series. Again, Hoplite Channel, we appreciate you being here. Take care. We'll see you next time.